Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 101st video in our Master Series and the 15th video in our subgroup mixing, and hopefully the last video in our subgroup mixing. First of all, I hope that I addressed enough techniques to where you can get a good job done on your subgroup mixing. We talked about out front tracks, we talked about supportive tracks, we talked about backing tracks in a couple different ways, and we also talked about wash tracks. That a lot of times that people will get confused a little bit about them because sometimes they're really washed, that are way in the background, and sometimes they're right just kind of underneath the supportive tracks that you really just got to make sure that the transient effect of the drums and the bass and things like that don't get washed out by it, because it can be integral in the music, because of the texture of it. And we talked about, a bunch of different things that we had talked about if you watched the whole short series on mixing concepts and watched this whole series on subgroups, that you should be able to do a pretty good production. And by this time, your subgroups should be set up pretty well. I mean, normally at this point that, you really, you're going to go clean up your tracks, make sure you got auto fades on them, things like that. And then you're going to go through and you're going to make a submix bus, for those subgroups, and put your spatialization preset on them that we had talked about, and getting it set up ready to go into mixing. Because most of the time that, when I'm going through there and I start blending, we talked about the first video on the subgroup mixing, then I'll start out about, the first one that I bring up in there, that I'm going to mix a subgroup together about -6 to give myself a little bit of headroom, and then I'll start bringing things up into it. Most of the time. Sometimes I'll go down farther if I've got a lot of tracks in my subgroup, because then I'll start going over clipping. Making sure nothing's clipping on any of your solo tracks at all before you start that. And then on my subgroup, subgroup bus, then I'll make sure that's set to about -3 to give myself a bit of headroom going into mixing. And it's a pretty simple concept. We didn't really get into showing you how to mix that together because, I talked about it enough, and I felt that was much more important, because you know how to turn up a fader and turn down a fader. And, one of your biggest things is going to be just doing it and walking away. You've got this one here, you've brought it up, and it's at -6 or something, or -6 or something like that. You brought the other one up, brought it up to there so far until that sounds good, and now you on and on and on, and then walk away, and walk away for a little bit and come back, go listen to it again, walk away from it, come back, and do that a few times, let your ears get a rest. It's because it'll start getting attuned to things, and you might not be hearing things properly because it's just getting tired, and especially hearing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes I spend a lot of time on my subgroups, and I might be listening to that subgroup for a long time, and my ears are tired. I'm tired of listening to it. My ears are tired of listening to it. Everybody's tired of listening to it, and I'm going to go walk away from it and then come back and, listen to it again with some fresh ears. And it's okay, because, it's kind of a work in progress, and keep in mind that, we didn't get into a whole lot of complicated things happening with that. Well, we did with some of it. If you watch the mixing concepts videos before we did the subgroup mixing and watched all the subgroup mixing, there's a whole lot of complicated things and complex things we talked about. But they're not that complex. And, we talked about some things, the more simple the production is, the more complicated things you can do without muddying the mix and making a mess, because not only can you cause a muddying problem, but you can also cause a problem of you're doing stuff that people aren't going to ever hear. You've got a whole lot of stuff going on in your production, and you're doing all these complicated mixing techniques that we've talked about to a big production with a complement of a lot of instruments, and a lot of that stuff will just get lost. And not only does it get lost in the mix, but it causes mud. So, and losing clarity and quality of sound. So there's a couple things, you really need to think about that as you go along. The smaller the production is and the smaller the complement of instruments is, that the more complicated things you can do that are really going to be audible, that sound really cool, that aren't going to get lost in the mix and cause the mix to get muddied, and or cause it to sound messy, dirty, unclear, and the quality of sound just go down. So just really keep that in mind. You know, because we talked about everything from out front tracks, whether they're out front vocals or the lead, you know, section, or the, you know, a lead section and a short break, and how to deal with them in a bunch of different ways. And all those concepts, most of them you can apply to any one of the types of concepts we talked about through the whole subgroup mixing series. But it's really, really important on your out front tracks, because they are out front. Everything else is either supportive or backing tracks. And then we talked about supportive tracks and how to deal with them a lot of ways. We talked about you know, like guitars, a couple different ways to do your support tracks. We talked about support tracks that were panned to one way and a duplicate of it or something on the other side to try to fill out the stereo field, you know, and make it sound better because of some of the concepts we talked about. And we talked about like guitars or pianos that are supportive tracks and some of the ways of dealing with them, that they're basically underneath your out front tracks and your supporting tracks, but above your backing tracks, like the rhythm section. A lot of times it's the bass and the drums or something like that. And we also talked about the bass. We talked about the bass and the drums, and we talked about how, you know, they're a lot of times, you know, they're the rhythmical section. One of them is a musical rhythmical section, and one of them is acoustical rhythmical section. And they work together. And sometimes the bass comes out of that and really has a lot of interplay musically with what's going on in the band. And so you have to take that into consideration, because sometimes the bass has got to come up in the mix a little bit because of its musical role. Does that make sense? That it's not just rhythmical, that it's much more musical, so you can't have it in the background just thumping along with the drums, keeping its transients up, you know, and trying to, you know, keep it as far as a rhythmical flavor. And it's a huge thing to take into consideration. And then we talked about washes. We talked about washes, what, you know, doing different types of washes, you know, to help your production. And sometimes people will put that stuff in their production and don't really understand what that is. And, you know, to me, I call it a wash, because it really is to fill out the spectral field and the stereo field, you know, to fill both of them out really well, to just make the production sound lusher, fuller, and richer, and just have, like, it's full, like it has more content, so it just doesn't come out sounding thin and empty, you know. And that what that is, and put a name on it, you know, so that you can apply it, you know, properly, instead of it becoming, you know, detrimental to your mix. And then we talked about drums. Drums are an integral part of a whole lot of music productions. Sometimes drums are very much out front, you know, dance music, some tribal music, some types of genres of music. The drums are very pertinent, so they really, you know, fill out a few different roles. Sometimes drums will be out front tracks, sometimes they'll be support tracks, sometimes they'll be backing tracks, sometimes that they'll even be washes. You know, that, and they can take all those different types of roles. And if you keep that in mind as you're mixing, and you really determine what their role is, that mixing the drums isn't that hard. You know, you can use any of the concepts we talked about in subgroup mixing and in mixing concepts to apply it to your drums, and it becomes a matter of personal taste. Just like everything else we talked about so far, it's hard to teach the stuff, to give an idea of what things are really going to be important that you're going to run into, and then off you go, because you're really going to have to make a determination of what is important to you. How is it going to sound to you? You know, how does it sound best to you? You know, and it's like, if you get online and talk to 1,000 different mixing, mastering, and recording engineers, that they might have a different opinion of that. And you might have mixed your drums beautifully, bro. They sound great. I listen to us and they sound great, bro. I might have mixed them the same way, but they sound great. Bob will say, no, I don't like that. You need to turn up your kick drum. No, you need to turn down your snare. You got to turn up your hi-hat. The crash cymbal's too quiet. Your overheads are a little bit too quiet, or they're too loud. That's his opinion. You know, that doesn't mean that's correct, you know. So, you know, you really need to learn to trust yourself anytime you're doing any type of mixing, because mixing, once you get to the mixing stage, and it's the same with processing, that, you know, you really have to be able to start learning to trust yourself to make those determinations. And if it's coming out sounding bad to you, it means you're doing something wrong, that you don't know how to get something done to make it sound good. So I try to make this series this way, so at least there's really no way of you not understanding you screwed something up. And it's like, I did something wrong there, I did too much of that, I understand I did too much of that, and I understand that way, that I can go back and go, that it sounds too much like, huh. And then I go, well, why would that happen? What did I do going through this master series that would have caused that? At what phase through the master series could I have caused that problem? So because it's not sounding the way I want it, and no matter what Bob or Randy or Timmy think, does that make sense? Because that's their opinion. And it really doesn't matter. Some of them are millionaires. Some of them are in a home studio. I know people in their home studio that can mix and they can record and they can compose. They're not millionaires, but they're badass. And I know people that make $1 million that aren't badass, but they make a lot of money and they're not. I wouldn't equate them with that person that I know in his home studio because that person does that type of quality work. So it doesn't really matter, where they're at financially. But that can be not true also, because I always say that, when if you're doing a certain type of music, while things are going on in the 2000s, that you want to sound pretty comparable to what's going on, unless you are just one of those, you're going to change the way things are, which, that's what's happened a lot of times in history, that people have changed things by doing something new and unique. But be careful that you do something new and unique and nobody wants to listen to your stuff because it doesn't sound like Bob's reggae album. So just be kind of careful of that and don't kick yourself around in the head of it, because it doesn't mean you did a bad job, unless you really did a bad job, which hopefully if you do everything I say, you'll be able to tell. And, somebody with an honest opinion will be able to tell, you just did a bad job on that. And, you need to fix some of that because it's a mess. So I hope you take all that stuff into consideration that we talked about in this subgroup mixing. Really go through that mixing concept short series that I did before we went into this submix series, and enjoy yourself. Do a good job. Really pay attention to what you're doing. Really sit down and lay things out really well in your arrangement and putting things where they're supposed to be, and then just start working with those concepts, and work with the simpler ones first. As you get more comfortable with the simpler ones, then work on more complicated ones, because you jumping right into algebra before you understand addition and subtraction and being able to do it well may cause you a problem and frustration, and then you're not happy with it, and then you don't want to do it anymore. You think it's not a good technique because you're not doing a good job of it, because get your project done simply. You can elaborate it as you get better. Try new things, try other things, but just be careful, because like I said, I try to put the most basic, simple concepts on this short subgroup mixing series together, to where anything else above that is flash. And there's some cool things that you can do, and I'm not going to take away from that, because I love like movie scores and stuff like that, and really complicated things that people have put together. But if you can do that well, you should be able to come out with a seriously good sounding production. And it basically is going to fall on the composer and who will compose the thing, and who played it to is the only thing that's going to be holding you back from making whatever that is sound good. So I really hope you enjoyed this subgroup mixing series, and I certainly hope you practice doing those things so you can do them well. And I will see you in the next video when we start talking about subgroup processing. Peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed this short series on subgroup mixing, and I'll see you in the next video.